Have you ever felt pressured to change your convictions, not because you were wrong, but because others around you made you feel like you had to fit in? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about the Bible one small chapter at a time. And Paul is up against that in Galatians 2. Even the Apostle Peter gets caught up in this whole entire trap. And we're going to explore more about what happened and what happens when people get put under peer pressure to change what they believe about their faith, and why grace is the most important thing and is the center of our faith and not our works. So we start out with Paul talking about how he was, after 14 years, he finally went back to Jerusalem, went with Barnabas, took Titus, a Greek that he had with him. And the trip was prompted by a revelation, not a human request. He laid that out in the gospel that he was preaching to Gentiles in a private meeting. Some of those who were influential, likely an apostle or some elders, so that his ministry would not be in vain. Titus, being a Gentile, was not compelled to be circumcised, and that is the huge point here. Something false brothers who had infiltrated this group in Galatia were trying to push them to do. They were breaking into freedom in Christ, that we have freedom in Christ, that we no longer are obligated to live under these rules and obligations that the Jewish people had been doing for all these years, but instead giving up their freedom, I guess, for the slavery of the law once again. And so in the end, what they were doing was giving up their freedom in Christ and bringing back slavery under the law. Paul's clear. We did not yield to them for even a moment. The truth of the gospel has to be preserved. The important part is not what you do or you don't do. If you want to wash your cup in a certain way, if you want to do ritual washing, if you want to get circumcised, go for it and do it. But if you are losing your freedom in Christ, if you are saying that there's a different gospel out there of how people are saved, no, that is not where this goes. And this underscores, I think, a lot of what Paul's gospel is saying, that this is the same gospel as the Jerusalem apostles. They affirmed this particular message. This is something that, and Paul was not trying to seek their approval. He wants unity, and he wants them to be listening to the same truth, to hearing that they are in the same gospel. So Paul says to those who seemed influential that God shows no partiality between these apostles that recognized Paul and entrusted him with the gospel to the uncircumcised, the Gentiles, just as Peter had been circumcised and sent to the Jews. It's a key comparison that Peter and Paul had different audiences, same gospel, same message, not saying anything differently. James, Peter, named Cephas, that's going to be his Roman name, John, were described as pillars of the church, that the fellowship that goes right through goes to Paul too, and Barnabas. This is basically a public, they're publicly acknowledging them as being gospel messengers. It wasn't just something that they were tolerating, or it was like, oh, just let Paul do whatever he wants to do. The church in Jerusalem, the other apostles embraced his mission. And the only ask that Paul and Barnabas remember the poor, which Paul said he was really eager to do. So that was important. There's this confrontation that's mentioned in this particular letter, which is pretty amazing. So Peter comes to Antioch and was eating with Gentile believers. No problem there. We can do that. We also know that Peter met with the Gentiles and realized he could, do that and feel free and not worry about what he was eating. But then certain men, it says, came from James, and Peter drew back and separated himself, fearing that those in the circumcision party, sometimes they were called Judaizers, like trying to return Christianity and make it into Judaism, somehow came there too. And even Barnabas was led astray, it said, by their hypocrisy. This word hypocrisy is strong in here. Peter knew the truth. He had that vision in Act 10 that I just mentioned that declared all food, all people, don't make what God created unclean. They were all acceptable. He baptized Cornelius, who was a Gentile. He knew better, right? He knew that was it. Yet, out of fear of these other people and what they were saying in this area, he acted as if the Gentiles were not fully accepted. And Paul confronts Peter to his face and says, if you can, through a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force Gentiles to live like a Jew? Why are you pushing people to live in different ways where God didn't demand us to do those things? And it's important, you get this idea, because I don't think the apostles want to argue lightly, but you are sitting there, and if you are okay, you still can live like a Jew. You're circumcised. You can still eat, kosher food if that's what you want to do. You still can worship at the temple if that's what you want to do. If you want to do those things, go for it. No one's making you live like a Gentile, and you shouldn't be making the Gentiles live like Jews at all, because you're making them do things in a way that God never asked them to do and is not the gospel. That is not their culture. And so this, like I said, it felt at first when I was reading it like some sort of a personality clash with it. But Paul saw the gospel itself was at stake, that Peter's actions were undermining the truth that we're all saved by faith, not by keeping the law. And it was giving the wrong appearance to a church of Gentiles. Paul's going to be sensitive to that because that's who he's been ministering to. And you can just imagine that if you had, gone to a particular area in the world and people started coming in and saying, oh, well, you eat chickpeas. Don't you dare eat chickpeas. You'd be like, why are you saying that? That is not how this goes. So now we get to the really important part about this, justification by faith. This is one of the biggest theological explanations in Paul's letter, that we ourselves, he says, Jews by birth. We're Jews by birth. Of course we are. We're not Gentile sinners. We're not people from outside. We know, though, that a person is not justified by their works of the law. They're justified by the faith in Jesus Christ. Of course, Peter's going to know that. He spent all that time with Jesus and got taught that. He saw day in and day out, with Jesus talking about the Sabbath laws, and they tried to crush Jesus at every point for breaking Sabbath rules. What's more important, healing a person or keeping Sabbath laws? What's more important, washing a cup the right way or having your heart be in the right place? What's more important, looking and dressing the important way or having a heart for God? Jesus confronted this all the time. And like I said, Peter had his own revelation there. We know better. We know this is how it is. Justification is the act of being declared righteousness before God because of the work of Jesus Christ, not because we earned anything in obeying law, doing the right thing, driving 55 miles per hour in a 55 zone. We receive it through faith in Jesus Christ. And Paul himself uses himself as an example in this. He says, you know what? I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer, me who lives. Christ lives inside of me. It sounds very poetic, but it's theological. He's saying that this old identity, the old Paul, the old Saul, who was bound to law and sin and doing all those things, washing his hands the right way, keeping the Sabbath the right way, that's gone. That guy's dead. He no longer exists. He has this new identity that is now entirely inside with Christ. So Paul ends this chapter, and then he makes a very strong statement at the end of this chapter. I don't nullify the grace, for if righteousness were through the law, if we got all of this by obeying the law, then Christ died for no reason at all. There was no reason for Christ to die if we were supposed to still follow in this law. If we could do our own works and do our own things, Jesus didn't even need to die. That's the heart of the gospel. That's what makes Christianity unique. We are not saved by what we do. We are saved by what Christ has already done. And this is the most important part. I think that this whole chapter is stunning, and I understand why Many theologians found this to be a favorite of theirs. I'm going to meditate on, are there still ways where I'm trying to earn God's love and approval, or even try to earn the approval of by other people, by my actions? Even things that are good habits, even things that, maybe we should do, can start to become subtle ways where we justify ourselves. We ask God to show us, I think areas where we're not living by grace. So dwelling on that, Galatians 2:20, by the way, which was in church this morning, and consider what it means to live by faith alone in Jesus Christ, who loves us all and gave himself for us, died on the cross. Was it for nothing? No. So we get that way. I think we do. I hear people who aren't necessarily Christians, but they consider themselves to be Christians. I just think that they don't understand Christianity yet. They'll say, well, do I think I'm going to go to heaven? I mean, I have done a lot of really good things. I have supported a lot of amazing charities. I hope that helps. And we fall into that. And so I'm going to do more meditation about that. And what I'm going to pray about is that thanksgiving for the gift of justification. Christ did die on the cross. He did that, so I don't have to prove my love for him, my worth to him. I don't have to prove my value in being, to going to heaven. It's Jesus who took on my sin, gave me his own righteousness, and then helps me to walk every day so that I don't live carelessly and I don't live, I just don't make it cheap, when they talk about cheap grace. I'm not just going to do my own thing and say, well, God forgave me anyway. I can do what I want to do. But I want him to help shape me into someone who walks like he does. And I want to be able to reflect his grace and his love and his forgiveness and give up pride, give up showiness, guard me, from the hypocrisy or maybe even fear. Maybe the Galatians were afraid that if they didn't do these things, they would not be saved. And so I hope that is where God guides me. And what I'm going to share with others is that idea that if the law could save us, Christ died for nothing. It's a huge claim. It's good news because he did die. He was resurrected. His death was not in vain. And because of it, we have our part in God's family. We are already accepted. And now we should live like that's true. That should be a huge relief to all of us. And I hope that people that we share that with hear that. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you listening and watching. We're going to talk about Galatians 3 next, which is going to dig even deeper to this idea of theology of faith and promise. I hope you are there for it. Please remember that you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com, and you could go to Jill from the North Woods and find all my podcasts. Thanks so much. Have a great day.